your work and stuff?
Are you excited about our trip?
What trip?
What? Are we rolling?
Yes, ma'am.
To see Mr.
Okay.
Posen?
Welcome Toby, welcome Angela,
So-
good to have you back.
What's good?
And we're going to finish this lecture, the first part of the lecture on Christ teaches that he is the bread of life. And remember I told you that this is split into 2 chapters. So, and we're just doing the first 3 things in this chapter: the setting, the command, the unbelief, and then we'll get to the other 4 in the next chapter. And just to review a little bit, I'm going to read this through to you and fly through what we did yesterday and then continue on. On the next day, the crowd that remained on the other side of the sea, remember this is near Bethsaida, in the sort of northeastern quadrant of the shores of the Sea of Galilee, where the feeding of the 5,000 took place. When they saw that there had only been one boat there, and that Jesus had not entered the boat with his disciples, but that his disciples had gone away alone, other boats from Tiberias came near the place where they had eaten the bread after the Lord had given thanks. So when the crowd saw that Jesus was not there, nor his disciples, they themselves got into the boats and went to Capernaum seeking Jesus. When they found him on the other side of the sea, they said to him, "Rabbi, when did you come here?" So the place was the synagogue at Capernaum. Now we didn't read that in what we just read. We read that we read that at the end of chapter 6. Then here's the lake, and there's the different choices, but really it was there, and there's the winds that go across, and there's the picture, and there's the mock-up of the synagogue, and there's the original rock that Jesus would have walked on. And then the time is after the feeding of the 5,000, the next day after the feeding of the 5,000. And here's what we learn from this: his perception. He knows what they're thinking. Remember, he said, they said, "When did you get here?" And he didn't say, "I don't know, last night." He said, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you are seeking me not because you saw signs, but because you ate your fill of the loaves. Do not work for the food that perishes, but work for the food that endures to eternal life." He knew why they were seeking him. He knew that they only wanted what he could do for them. They were looking for another miracle. They didn't really want a relationship with him. And so he gives them this command: pursue spiritual realities, not that which is temporary. Invest your life, as I said yesterday, invest your life in those things that are eternal. Here we go. Make eternal investments. And there are only 3 things that are eternal: God, his word, and people. And so that is where we are to be investing our lives, which is why I told you I wake up every day excited to get to school and make more investments in the lives of my students. And hopefully I'm doing that well in a way that honors God. But there's misunderstanding among the Jews. And we read in verse 28, Jesus answered them, "This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he has sent." They say, "What work do you do? Or what work do we need to do?" And Jesus says, this is it, believe. It's not even a work, right? But they are to believe. They only heard the first part and the last part of this command. They heard that they were to work, but they missed everything in between. They missed what they need to do the works of God, which is have faith in Christ. So that it was their unbelief that caused them to miss it. And so then it says, so they said to him, "Then what sign do you do that we may see and believe you? What work do you perform? Our fathers ate the manna in the wilderness. As it is written, he gave them bread from heaven to eat." Jesus said to them, "Truly, truly, I say to you, it was not Moses who gave you the bread from heaven, but my Father who gives you the true bread from heaven." And of course, he's speaking of himself. So Christ's explanation is simple. He says, just believe in him. but they are unbelieving. And we talked about how their question was ridiculous. What sign do you do? Were you there yesterday when I fed the 5,000? And it's ridiculous. Like, what else? What are you going to do now? What are you going to do for me now? What are you going to do for me now? Never satisfied with what has been done for them. They're trying to explain away the miracle, and they're trying to minimize the miracle. They're being very disrespectful of Jesus because they're saying, well, you gave us bread one day, but Moses gave bread for 40 years or whatever it was. Manna, literally the word manna meant, what is it? Because they took one look at it and went, what is it? And then they named it that. So, 40 days, one time, or 40 years, one time, one day, which is greater. And so they were saying Moses' miracle was greater, but Jesus' answer is this: Moses didn't give you that. God did. And you should ask him to give you the true bread of life, which is Jesus. Jesus is the true bread of life. They were refusing to believe. They had the Son of God standing right in front of them, and they were refusing to believe. That is not that uncommon, that people refuse to believe. Here's what they say to God: show me a sign, and I will believe. God doesn't work that way. God's not your showman. God's not your, our new dog Mabel is very obedient. And we say come and she comes, and we say sit and she sits. That's not the way God works. He's in charge. And so people say, show me a sign and then I'll believe. But God says, believe. And then you will know. Believe and then you will see. There's a former pastor. His name is Bart Campolo. That name Campolo may be familiar to you, probably familiar to your parents. His father, Tony Campolo, was one of the most popular preachers of my day, of the late 1900s, 80s, 90s. And Bart, Tony, his name's Tony. Tony and his son Bart began working together once Tony grew up and he became a pastor. But at some point, Bart, the son, began to have questions about his faith. And his wife even said to him at one point, why are you even going through with this charade? You don't believe in God. She's about as good as Job's wife. And so he has now declared himself to be an atheist. He no longer claims to be a follower of Christ, which breaks his father's heart. He was a pastor. And he was asked in an interview, and we'll actually read this. Did we read this last year, Carissa, about Bart Campolo? Did you read about Bart Campolo last year? You don't remember? I think it's senior year that we read about Bart Campolo, but I'm just giving you the Reader's Digest version. And he was asked by this interviewer, what would it take for you to believe in God? And he said, I'll tell you what it would take. I want to see an amputee grow a limb back. What does God have against amputees? I mean, he supposedly heals all these people. Why doesn't he just grow a limb back? If I saw that, then I'd believe. How arrogant is it to say, you do this for me, God, you show me this, then I'll believe. That's not the way God works. God says believe, and you'll see all kinds of stuff you can't even imagine. Could God grow a limb back? Of course he could. He created food out of almost nothing. But if that's what sustains our faith, it is works of God, that if we see God moving, we believe. If we don't, no. Then that's not faith. And that's not the way God works. God says, trust me, and I'll show you I'm worthy of your trust. This is one of those times when I wish Mrs. Schrock would walk into my right time. She did so with the seniors and regaled them with stories. Mrs. Schrog walks incredibly closely with God, and she has, I don't think I'm exaggerating, thousands of stories of the way God has worked miraculously in and around her, and the things God has spoken to her. I'm going to give you just one, but I want you to understand that this place where you are sitting, and so much more, if you could hear all the stories of how God has provided for others, you'd be blown away. And here's one such story. When I came to Cornerstone, when we toured with Lane for Cornerstone, he was in 6th grade, and the whole school was in TLC, kindergarten through I think then 9th grade, I think. And before that, it had been kindergarten through 8th grade. Anybody there at TLC? Obviously, some of you were that I taught PE, okay? And then that summer, or late that school year, but with very little time to prepare, Bellevue Christian Academy closed, and the population of Cornerstone skyrocketed, like 60% overnight, because a number of those students began. Anybody here go to BCA? Yeah. A lot of those students came to Cornerstone. And so now, I mean, they were already outgrowing Thanksgiving Lutheran, and now they had outgrown it, and something had to happen. So the kindergarten through 5th grade stayed at TLC, and the 6th through the high school went to BCC, Bellevue Christian Center. But that was never intended to be a permanent situation. That was hard for them, that their school had just closed and now this other school takes over, and it was hard for us. And so that was never intended. So they began looking for a building and looked at building after building after building and talked to people, and do we look for land, and do we, all these different avenues, and every single one of them was nope, 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 nope. Mrs. Schrog is often asked things, she's often asked this: how do you afford 140,000 square feet, which is what we have here? You know what her answer always is? God provides. God provides. And that's the way Cornerstone runs itself, all the time. I was going to tell you only one. I'll get back to that story. When we, what grade were you in when we started upstairs? You're in 7th grade? Okay. So we're having teachers' meetings. So it is days before the school year has started. We still have no cafeteria tables. Do you know this story? Yeah. And Mrs. Schrog said, that's fine. We'll put out blankets and we'll have picnics every day. It will be fine. And then out of the blue, after the first or second day of teacher meetings, Mr. Hood gets a call and says, hey, I know someone who's given away cafeteria tables. Do you know anyone who could use those? Yeah. And guess what? They're blue and silver. God provides. So we need a building. This situation with BCC is not going to be able to continue, and we need a building. And every avenue, every possible building is shut down. It just doesn't work. So our board president has a lunch date with a high school friend of his or a college friend of his. I'm not sure who it is or which it is. But he's actually a Bellevue boy. His name is Brett. His little brother Billy was a good friend of my sister's. And he is the superintendent of Platteview Public Schools. What's his last name? Do you know? The Platteview superintendent? I can't remember his last name now. Richards. Brett Richards. I got it. Last hour they didn't get that. Little Billy Richards, I used to call his little brother. He's So our board president has a lunch date with Brett Richards, but he says to Brett, I can't stay the whole time. I've got to meet a guy about a building for our school. So they're there, they're having their lunch, And all of a sudden Brett goes, hey, weren't you supposed to go have a meeting? And I think it was George Schuler said, yeah, it fell through again. We're trying to find a building for our high school. We need one soon, and it's just not happening. And then he says, you don't happen to have an extra school lying around, do you? And Brett Richards said, well, as a matter of fact, we do. That's the Platte. That's a Platteview school that was empty and needing someone to come in and inhabit it. And they gave it to us, not for nothing, but at an amazingly affordable rent. And God provided every penny that was needed to renovate it and to get it ready. And when the time was right here, we wanted to move everybody in from the beginning, but the money wasn't there. But God provided, and here we are, over and over and over again, as the leadership of Cornerstone has faithfully and continually said, we will follow you, no matter what you ask of us. As our leadership has done that, God has provided. When we entrust God with our lives, and when we say, come what may, God, I will trust you, we see God work in amazing ways. And so the person who says, show me a sign and I'll believe, has it backwards. God says, believe, and then you'll know, then you'll see. That is my deepest desire for each of my students, is that you would taste and see that the Lord is good, and believe so that you can see the many things that He does. That is the end of this lecture, I think. We're going to do two things. First, I'm going to give you the quiz that you can take with your friends, open book.